studying Torah. This, what we're doing, is showing part of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu ba'asot b'divrei Torah. We praise the Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us by commandments and commands us to occupy ourselves in the words of Torah. That better be mine. You may have to look at it.
I got it right.
Thanks to Rabbi Andrew Goldstein of Northwood and Pinner Liberal Synagogue in London, whose congregation has a Kolin Torah, and to Michael Hepner. Thank you, Michael. Better thing. And thanks to Michael Hepner, who first made the connection between Kolin Torah and us, and who was one of the best scholars in residence we ever had. Here's what I want to share with you. Before the Holocaust, then during the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, and now. And the question is, the origin, where is this Torah from? Okay. This is the Kolin Torah, underneath this mantle. The congregation commissioned an Israeli artist, whose name escapes me, to do the Torah mantles for all the mantles in the congregation. And when this, in the style of the 7 species of Israel, and this one they commissioned, and she decided to do it this way. Black, somber, Jewish life, cut off, darkness, Jewish life again. Simple but beautiful symbolism. So this Torah comes from the Czech town of Kolin. It's in Bohemia, Western Czechoslovakia. Amazingly, when we first got to the cemetery there, we found that the names in the cemetery were an echo of the Bohemian Czech names which are on our Kaddish list, which means that the founders of this congregation were Bohemian Jews, and the names are the same. And there's still some on the Kaddish list, and still a few who are offspring of that group. I want to read a small section of the book called Fragments of Memory, written by Hannah Greenfield. Hannah Greenfield, who just died about 3 weeks ago. Does that look familiar to anybody? We bought up a cartload of these when we were doing study of the Kolin Torah, and gave them out free. They were out in the vestibule of the old synagogue, and so a lot of people have them. It's a wonderful short book of her. She was born in Kolin. And, oh, by the way, who's this handsome devil? Richard Feder, the last rabbi of Kolin. And that's what he looked like. And I tell you, when I have gone to Kolin with youngsters especially, and had them stand in front of the ark and say prayers in Kolin, I have had the sense, and I've imparted this to them, that Rabbi Feder is someplace up in the cloud, somewhere, looking down and being very surprised and very delighted that something like that is going on in his show once again. Here's what Hannah Greenfield says. This first one is interesting. The Jewish community of Kolin also had its share of blood libel blood libel, meaning Jews accused of something they hadn't done, which was to take the host, the consecrated wafer, and make it bleed, or take the blood of Christian children to make matzah. Anyway, the Jewish community had its share of blood libel. In 1913, a young woman made pregnant by a Roman Catholic priest committed suicide in Kolin. The young priest named Rachowski tried to implicate the Jews in a blood libel, but fortunately they were ultimately exonerated. Shades of things to be. And now Hannah says, between the two world wars, the Jewish community of Kolin prospered and grew under the leadership of Dr. Richard Feder. Classy-looking guy, really classy. I think he could walk, and he was pretty, not an Orthodox rabbi. He was conservative in a liberal way, conservative where Reform hadn't gotten there by name, although Isaac Mayer Wise, the founder of Reform Judaism, was from Bohemia, so that's certainly a home of liberal Judaism. And when the first Czechs came to this country, they formed a synagogue, the Czechs, not Orthodox, not even conservative, but Reform. Us, B'nai Jehoshua. Okay, between the two world wars, the congregation grew under the leadership of Rabbi Feder. We thought of ourselves as part of the Czech nation, differentiated only by our faith. Like us, right? Until, I'm not making a point of that, I'm just saying that that's who they were, as Jews are in so many other countries. Differentiated only by our faith until the outbreak of the Second World War, when Czechoslovakia was occupied by Germany. As early as January 1940, Jewish shops had already been confiscated, and Jewish women, including my sister and myself, her sister Irina, who traveled with us twice to Kolin from Prague, we were forced to work in the local soap factory. Today, the sole remnant of that rich community is an abandoned, decaying synagogue. Not so decaying anymore, she wrote this a while back. And two graveyards spanning 600 years of Jewish presence there. That's what Hannah said. And here's what Rabbi Richard Feder said. You have this, but let me read it to you, because it's been copied so many times that it's a little bit difficult. Rabbi Feder, who was an old man who had moved to Brno, a town not so far from Kolin, Rabbi Feder heard that the Torahs from all over Czechoslovakia had been given to congregations all over the world for safekeeping, and was delighted to hear it, and wrote a letter to a congregation in Bowie, Maryland, which had just received a Czech Torah. And here's what he said to them in part. The Jews from Kolin were craftsmen, butchers, bakers, tailors, even very skilled goldsmiths, who delivered their goods far and wide. They had many philanthropic societies for poor people who donated fuel in winter, bread, flour for matzahs, wine for holidays, and medicines for the sick. They assisted poor Jewish brides and provided trousseaux for them when they married. To poor tradesmen, they allowed credit without interest. They took care of poor Jewish students and travelers. Among the Kolin, Jews were physicians who were then called for a consultation to prominent families. Many lived in the neighborhood of Kolin as stockholders. Leaseholders. Yes, thank you, as leaseholders of small or big industrialists. After liberation in 1848, the first war, their sons went to study law and engineering, and many of them became prosperous. So that's a little bit about the kind of a town that Kolin was. It was the second largest town in Czechoslovakia. You know, when we talk about Kolin, we think of some kind of a backwater place, a little town, maybe there was a tailor shop. Not at all. Industrial, it had about 150,000 people, in that time, which was a fairly good-sized town. And even today, those of us who've been there know that it's not a small town. It's an industry and a downtown and sort of a suburban area as well. And then, what happened? Well, you know what happened. Now we're talking about then. You know enough about the Holocaust for us not to do another lecture on the Holocaust, okay? You know that story. But most of the Jews who were taken from Kolin were taken from the main square of Kolin. Everybody who has been to Kolin has been in that square. That's downtown. And so they use Foursquare and nice apartment buildings around. Myra has given us a picture, it's among those I'll put out, of what it looked like in that downtown. An ordinary square with people living and people doing business. As a matter of fact, that's even where the celebrations of Kolin's independence are held. And one of the celebrations they hold is the, Myra, what do they call the book kind of a band? Where's Myra?
I called it an Papa band.
Myra called it the Papa band. And on the day when Jews were there commemorating Kolin, the Papa band, you know, the trumpets and the tubas are going, and it made a strange background, a strange and not so friendly background to the commemorations that were going on in Kolin. Almost all the Jews who were not killed were taken to Theresienstadt concentration camp, which is not so far away from Prague. And those who've gone on a trip to that area have certainly been to Terezin. Theresienstadt, to me, is the most terrifying of all the camps. I haven't seen all the camps. I've seen 3, but I've heard others describe. It is the most terrifying because it doesn't look like a concentration camp. Really, it started out as an army barracks in the small town of Terezin, and it was used as an army barracks, and it was sort of an army town with stores and apartments for the officers to live in. It looks nice. And even when you go up into the barracks that people were crammed into, the Jews were crammed into, you still have a sense, well, this could have been, given other circumstances, not a bad place to live for a while. There were rooms. When you didn't see how many people were crammed into the rooms when you went there to visit afterward, but it was horrible. And that's why, and I know a lot of you know this story, that's why when the Red Cross decided, after a lot of urging, to go in and make an inspection tour of concentration camps, the Germans were able to hoodwink, maybe it wasn't so hard to do, but were able to hoodwink the Red Cross into thinking that this really was just a transit camp or a place to gather or a place to keep Jews safe or together. And they were able to put on in Terezin a faux event where there was a soccer game on a greensward. And people were told beforehand if they don't participate in the game, they would be in terrible trouble. And there was even a band that played, and a play was put on also. Everyone forced into doing it. And the Red Cross came back and said, not as bad as we thought.
They gave them blankets for the day.
Yeah, right. I mean, when you go to if you go to visit Terezin, it is a good thing to visit, I think. They have an exhibition there which tells you the whole story. There's also a movie about Terezin. Anyway, this is where most of the Jews from Kolin wound up, including Rabbi Feder, who became the rabbi of Terezin. He did weddings in Terezin concentration camps. He helped officiate at funerals as much as they let him. He said prayers when there were cremations and the ashes were dumped in the river because they didn't have room for them. And he counseled people and was a calming Jewish presence for a lot of them. So maybe his short career in terrorism was as important as anything he ever did in Kolin. Now, I want to get back to the Torah. What did the Germans do to gather up the Torahs? I have to read this to you. You don't have this, so I'm going to read it. This is written by Michael Heppner, our friend who turned us on to Kolin and the Torah scrolls from Czechoslovakia. He's done a great deal of research. He's not a professor, although he could be a professor. He's an importer, and that's, by the way, how he got to find out about this, because his congregation got a Torah scroll from Kolin. They didn't know much about it, and his rabbi, Andrew Goldstein, said, "Michael, I hear you get to Czechoslovakia in your import business." Yes. When you're there, can you stop in Kolin and see what it's like? Is there a temple there? Whatever. We don't know anything about it. So Michael did. And that opened up a whole career of Michael's into not only the Kolin Torah, which his synagogue had, but the whole idea of collecting these Torahs and giving them out and keeping track. Here's what Michael writes. In 1940, the congregations were closed down in Czechoslovakia by the Nazis. But the Jewish community administration was used locally by the Germans to execute their stream of decrees and instructions. We've heard all about that, how Jews were enlisted, forced into keeping their occupations and offering their skills to the Germans. Deportation started in 1941, and the mass deportation of the Jews took place throughout 1942 and into January 1943. And that's where most of the Czech Jews, Kolin Jews, were taken to terrorism. Then, all that was left in these Czech towns were, can you guess? I'll tell you, you might be able to guess anyway. Those who were left were the half-Jews, right? Nazis made a distinction between half and a whole. Jewish partners from mixed marriages. They took the Jewish husbands and the Jewish wives away, but left the spouses. The empty synagogue buildings and the empty homes of the Jews. That's what was left. Fearful that remember, that's where this started. Remember, fearful that the deserted synagogues and community buildings would be at the mercy of looters and plunderers, a group of Jews at the Jewish Museum in occupied Prague, who were not taken away right away because they were doing important jobs of the Germans, cataloging all the things that the Germans had appropriated. The Jewish community was used locally. Deported, sorry for this. Fearful that the synagogues and community buildings would be at the mercy of looters, the group of Jews, clerks and overseers at the Jewish Museum in occupied Prague, submitted a plan to the Nazis. Very few people know about this. To save the Jewish ritual and cultural treasures in the vulnerable buildings by bringing them to the museum in Prague so that they could be cataloged and preserved. Get this, you're working for the Germans, and your aim is to save as much of this stuff as you can because you're Jewish, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. And so what they do is tell the Germans, there's some wonderful stuff in all these synagogues, which you'll be able to use and sell after the war, etc. So therefore, we'll help you bring them in from all the small towns around Czechoslovakia, Kolin and all a slew of them, and we'll take care of them for you, and then we'll catalog them. Because Nazis were great catalogers, right? We'll make perfect lists of where they were from, And so that's what they did. Now, why the Nazi overseers accepted this plan is not known. But now I think we have some idea. The result was that the Nazi-controlled Prague Jewish community sent out the orders that implemented the plan and permitted the transport companies to carry Jewish goods in from all these various towns, like the one this synagogue started from. With a few exceptions, the Torah scrolls, other liturgical treasures in gold and silver, were sent to Prague, along with historic archives and thousands of books. The remaining Jews were deported in 43, 44, and 45, and quite a number of these late deportees survived. Okay? All this stuff is coming in, and it's in Prague, and it's in, no room in all the museums for it. They didn't know where to put them. But the heroes are the Jewish clerks and professors and anthropologists, the museumologists, what do you call guys? Museologists, huh?
Curators.
Curators. Isn't that a great word? Curators. Live. And had the Nazis said, yeah, we know what you're doing. You're just saving this stuff for after the war. Had they known, but they didn't know, or they tried, they decided not to know, and these were really the heroes. The inventory of what had become the Jewish Museum expanded from under 800 to over 100,000 items as a result. A task force of Jewish curators, librarians, and other experts and collectors, effectively prisoners of the Nazis, set to work under Dr. Joseph Pollack, the former director of the museum in Košice, to sort, catalog, and identify the items that had come from over 100 synagogues in Bohemia and Moravia, an area to the east. It needed over 40 warehouses, including deserted synagogues in Prague and elsewhere, to store all the Jewish items. As the task progressed under oppressive and intimidating conditions, many of the Jews who were undertaking this work would suddenly be deported to terrorism. You're doing this work for the Jewish future, and you never know when at your desk a hand is going to come from behind and say, off you go, essentially. Now, here's the story we always used to tell, and the story you may know, but it turns out now is probably not the truth. I like the first story better, which I think is accurate. A legend has grown that the accumulation of the vast hoard of Judaica was planned by the Nazis to become their museum to the extinct Jewish race. One of the reasons you could see that that might not be the truth was the stuff they took from this was taken from the synagogues. Pianos, lots of pianos. Clocks. Pictures that had nothing to do with Judaism. If they really were planning a museum, what do you need all the pianos for? What do you need all the clocks for? So there's already a hint there that there's something watery about that explanation. It's become clear that the idea while the Nazi plan could not have been possible, while this plan could not have been possible without the approval of the Nazis, there's no evidence of a Nazi plan for a museum, which remains only a conjecture. It is possible that faced with the reality of this vast collection, the idea of a museum to the extinct race may have been born, but that wasn't the origin. And finally, so it was that in 1956, the Michla synagogue, big synagogue with a giant basement in the suburbs of Prague, became the warehouse in which hundreds of Torah scrolls were consolidated from various locations. They had come from the large Prague Jewish community and from the many smaller communities that were scattered across what was left of Bohemia after the Sudetenland, as part of their history, had been detached. The scrolls in the Michla synagogue didn't have Slovak scrolls, which were separate. So that's how they got to this basement of a synagogue in the suburbs of Prague. And I think if you've been to Prague on a Jewish trip, you may have been to the Mechla synagogue. And what happened then? Then the story gets a little murky, but in a few words, here's what we think happened. Dealers in antiquities found out about this cache of Torah scrolls and began to sell a few off to people who wanted them or to communities until it became pretty clear what was there. And a Jewish art dealer from London by the name of Eric Ostrich was in Prague and heard about this cache of Torah scrolls, asked to see it under pretense of buying it himself, and saw what it was and realized that this couldn't be left there. Contacted the St. John's, originally St. John's Wood Synagogue in London, because they're a very rich congregation, very large. You know, Westminster's where they are, but I don't know if Westminster had the money. Well, they had contacted the synagogue, and the synagogue heard about them, and the synagogue raised the money from some very wealthy British Jews to get those Torahs out of the synagogue in Prague and have them shipped by plane to England, where they went to the Westminster Synagogue, which built a special large room with racks, and there still are there. And if you go into Westminster Synagogue, you will see these Torah scrolls that remain. Usually those at this point are those which are so badly marred or torn that they really couldn't be thought of as a Torah scroll at all. And that's how we got ours. How do we get ours? Well, you know the story? I wrote it in the bulletin recently, so just over. So, Danny Siegel, a wonderful poet and storyteller and tzedakah maven, came to the congregation as a scholar in residence, and he was talking about, your synagogue is doing a lot with social action projects in tzedakah. You really should be proud. He said, and where is your Czech Torah scroll? We didn't know. He said, you, of all people who's doing such good stuff, should have a Czech Torah scroll. There was just a new Chavara in the congregation, and Hannah was the Hebrew teacher. Hannah just came in. Was the Hebrew teacher, right? Of that Chavara. You remember the people?
Yeah.
So say them out loud.
Oh, you want me to remember?
Between
It
us.
was the Steins.
Stan and
Stan and Ellen Stein.
Yep.
The Editons.
Ansel and Audrey Editon.
Prices.
David
The
Sheila
Gates. The Gateses. Who did you say, Phyllis?
Rice.
Manning Price and
Yeah.
his wife.
He was president of the congregation. What was his name? Jerry Loebman.
Jerry Loebman.
Jerry and Sylvia Loebman. And there were some others I can't remember.
You did very well.
It didn't change. Gates, I mentioned the Gates, the Gates. So we wrote to, and this Chavara said, we'd like to give that a Torah to the congregation, because there was an outlay of money for shipping and also just as a gift to the Westminster Foundation to keep the work going. I think it was $600, and the Chavara said, yes, we're going to make that happen.
They all had children the same age who were going to have a bar mitzvah, going to become b'nai mitzvah that
Right,
year.
that's right. Yeah, so in honor of that occasion. So, and we wrote and we sent the money and we heard it was coming to us and we could pick it up at British Air Express, British Air baggage on a certain day, and we got somebody with a big station wagon and we all drove out and excited to see what it was, and it was a big package which we put in the trunk and didn't want to open it at the airport. Chas v'sholem, opened it at the synagogue. We got it to the temple, took it off, and we unrolled it, and it was a big moment. And I was so delighted that I thought it could be a fragment. They had said to us, "There's no guarantee. You just take the Torah that we give you," and it could have been just a 2/3 of the Torah. it was an entire, and this is an entire Torah, marred with letters flaked off and with injuries, but still a whole Torah. And so it came to us. And it's been here since 19... I've got it someplace, but it's been here a long time. Now, okay, so I'll give you a quiz. So, for a while, we used to have B'nai Mitzvah kids read from this Torah at their bar mitzvah to make a connection between them and the lost Jewish community. We don't do that anymore. Anybody know why? Corey Cantor with the wonderful, irreplaceable, irrepressible. Corey Winter said as he saw kids doing this, and I was the one who let them do it because I thought it was a good idea, said, you know, there's a tradition that you don't read from a Torah scroll which isn't perfect. And this certainly is not perfect. It's got a lot of, not errors, but things that are missing, letters that are missing. So I said, let's send the question into the Reform Responsa Committee, right? And you've probably studied that responsa. And so when the answer came back, it's probably not a good idea to read it regularly because it reflects badly on the dignity of the congregation. But you certainly can read from it at other symbolic occasions. So therefore, all of us are going to read from it this morning, whether you know Hebrew or not. You're going to do it, I promise you. But I want to go back to Rabbi Richard Fetter. I'm a little bit taken and sort of obsessed with Richard Fetter, the last rabbi of Kolin, because I was the first rabbi at BGBE. So I feel somewhat a connection. We have 2 letters that he wrote. How they came to be, and Michael Hefner has all this stuff and gave us all this stuff, and we made copies. But these are 2 letters that he wrote to people after he came back from terrorism and came back home into Kolin. So would you open up the one, go to the one. And we're going to read this out loud and not out loud, but you're able to follow it. And, I think you'll get into the person of Rabbi Fetter. Well, I will start and you will end. He was writing to Dr. Edward Kirshner. Many times I prepared myself to write to you and to inquire how you are getting on in freedom, how you got used to the new unexpected circumstances. But it remains only in preparation until I am doing it today. Somebody else pick it up, please.
You must have heard of the great bad luck that has met me. I lost all my children and also grandchildren and am alone in my old age. My only luck is that my sister, 2 years my senior, returned with me and is now my housekeeper, so I can lead a life of an independent citizen and need not go to an old people's home where there is missing something I need most of all, tranquility. Kolin, where many Jews used to be, is today almost without a Jew, as there are only about 10 ancient Jews, a few half-Jews, and quarter Jews. Today there is in Kolin only 1 Jewish shop, 2 Jewish doctors, and 1 lawyer. The famous Kolin congregation, known in the wide area, has disappeared, and everything with it. The Germans vandalized our synagogue, sold the benches for firewood, used it as a warehouse, and polluted it terribly. And the new cemetery in Zalabi we had destroyed by the English in the air raids. It received 12 hits, hundreds of tombstones overturned or shattered, many graves disappeared altogether. We created a working unit and erected the upset and damaged stones. On Thursday, we erected your parents' tombstone. The grave is untouched, and from the stone was only the tip knocked off. And I hope we will still find it and repair it. With our labor, we are helped by hired men who we reward well, as it is really hard work. Some of the stones are more than 10 metric hundredweights, but our finances are very weak. But in spite of it, we hope that we shall fill in the craters by autumn and level everything in the rough. We have really an outstanding brigade, in which besides 2 doctors, 1 lawyer, 2 civil engineers, clerks, and also Aryan wives of Jews work and wash one tombstone after the other as they lay on the ground and were dirty. We have also erected the tombstone of Fanika Kirchner. When you come to Kolin, you will find the graves of your relatives, most likely in the best condition already.
Isn't it amazing that that's exactly the thing kids from this congregation did? This was 1946. Did 50 years later. Went into the cemetery, which had fallen into hard times again after this, and cleaned up in that very same way. Somebody else read for a while, please. Anyway.
I am today the leader of the Jewish community, which reaches up to Novi, Bidzov, and on the other side to Havlikavi Brod, Umpolik, and Dolby Kralovu.
Like Chicago is.
Everywhere we have many dead and few living. In Golkov, Jenikov, Harry, Umpolik, and Polny is not one Jew. Male. Hitler conquered us. He annihilated us completely, and we can only damn him and his nation. If it would be at least of some relevance, but I have recovered quite well. I put on about 10 kilograms and am traveling around the world. I am selling my wisdom, which has, however, bleached, as it produces only swan songs. But my old dad used to say, hail the man about whom people say, the thunder may strike him. But pity the one of whom they say, poor devil. And in this situation, we all find ourselves now. Do you live in your own house now? Do you still perform your art? How is your wife and the others? I would appreciate if you would soon reply. I remember with pleasure our walks and discussions in Terrazin. But what did we know then? Greetings to you and your dear family.
But what did we know then? Yes, an old broken man who somehow puts on a little weight and that inner courage or inner stuff somehow comes to the surface again after all that he's seen and all that he's gone through. Okay, and now the other way. I lost my coat. Lost my copy of the little letter.
One on the table over there.
Here is a strange, interesting letter which will stay in your mind and in its very personal way tells you a lot about what went on after terrorism. Somebody else to read. Somebody else. Arthur? Yes.
Which
Good.
page?
You're good because your voice comes.
Yeah,
through.
which page?
Well, I don't know, it's to Mr. Vladislav Peach.
The first page?
Yes.
Dear sir,
Okay. Dear sir, my office obliges me to warn you, you must most strongly about the intended step. To be a Jew is a very difficult task, even for the person who was born a Jew and who was compelled to resign himself to the faith. Although we got used from early childhood to remarks, insults, malice, injustice, we felt rather uneasy when we noticed how even scholarly men behaved and how they could not overcome prejudices which they sucked in with their mother's milk. And so sad a fate in these last few years was so terrible that every sensible citizen of our state, and particularly those who found themselves in the small fortress of Theresienstadt or another concentration camp, told themselves 10 times daily, thank God I am not a Jew. People are stupid and wicked creatures, and they do not get wiser and more virtuous, even now after this bloody war. Nobody will believe that you acted according to your best faith, belief, and conviction, and went to the first and last source of human faith and moral, and they will call you deserter, fool, stupid, and will turn away from you. Wherever you go, you will find difficulties and inconvenience. Nowhere will you find a person who will understand you. Now, after there is a handful of us left, where there is not enough of us to create a religious institution and an appropriate service, you will find nowhere an atmosphere which would raise your spirit for a short space of time. No, I warn you. Remain who you are. Read Psalms, prophecies, read the books of Moses. Consider the wisdom of those people thousands of years ago. Side with us whenever an opportunity presents itself to you. Remain our friend, but do not spoil your earthly fortune. Do not load your shoulders with an unbearable burden. You are still young, inexperienced, and do not know how low people tend to stoop when it is to their advantage. Why should you give a weapon into their hands they could fight you with? I wish you great success in your studies and your life. I am glad, having found out that other people have a sympathetic attitude toward us and our teaching. Be very happy. I am yours.
Be very happy, but don't be Jewish.
So, what was his intended step?
To convert. That's very clear. He wanted a young man in Kolin or one of the surrounding Jewish communities comes to the rabbi and says, I want to be Jewish. We don't know. We don't know why. We know. This is what we know. This letter. Is this the way we'd respond today? No. What do you think? I mean, any reactions to this? Any thoughts about it?
Did he ever become Jewish?
We don't know.
Oh, we don't know.
You know, I mean, there's no. This is the history we have. This is a piece of correspondence. So we have to read history, not into this. We have to read history from this. That, you know, do you think that having come back to Kolin would have made Feder feel again that it was okay to be Jewish? And here's a wonder. You know, you often can judge how a Jew feels about being Jewish, right? By seeing how that Jewish person feels about somebody who wants to convert. Ask him about what he thinks about conversion and his thoughts about, yes, no, it's good, I'm not so sure. Generally, is a projection of the way he feels about it. And a pretty accurate projection, too. Feder, before the war, I'm assuming, would have been very happy to help somebody become Jewish, I think. Well, and those is...
You know, they always, when someone wanted to convert, they didn't make it so easy. They had to prove that they really wanted it.
That's true. And so, and Feder and all the Jews, we know already that they had gone through some difficulties, some catcalling, and they didn't get the jobs they wanted. And what was the one? And the story of the blood libel that Hannah Greenfield wrote about. So there's a lot in the history of Kolin. Rabbi Feder wrote a large book on the history of the Jews of Kolin, which I will loan to any of you sometime, and you need some noodles. But it's got, so if you read just a little bit, you really sense something about the history of the Jew and the things that went on in the synagogue. By the way, talking a little bit Talmudically, excuse me, in the old cemetery of Kolin, Kolin has two cemeteries. The old one, which had burials before Columbus got to America in 1418 seems to be the oldest burial in that synagogue. Jewish cemetery, yes, Jewish cemetery. That the son of the, why is the name not coming? Of the wonder-working rabbi of Prague, well, I can't think of his name, the one who supposedly created the golem of Prague. Levi Yitzchak of Prague. Thank you, whoever helped. If anybody helped, thank you. And for example, there's one of the legends that's taught about Kolin. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, well-known, wonder-working rabbi of Prague, wanted to send a message to a town beyond Kolin. He had to go through Kolin to get there and get there. He gave his son the message to deliver, but told his son not to open the envelope. But on the way, his son did open the envelope. And the son got as far as Kolin with the message and had a heart attack of some kind and died. And they sent word back to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, your son died, we're sorry to say, what should we do with the body? Should we bury it? And the rabbi sent back, he must have opened the envelope. Bury him there with the fine Jews of Kolin, and there that son is buried. So there are all kinds of legends and maisalach and history of Kolin in this book that Feder wrote after he came back, I think after he came back from tourism. Other thoughts, questions before we go on?
Rabbi?
Just a second.
Somebody has their hand up.
Okay, I'm coming to you. Yes.
Have
Don't
we repaired this Torah?
say it again.
Have we repaired this Torah?
We're not allowed to touch it. Well, I shouldn't say that. We had a scribe look at it. Scribe said the ink was too flaked off and too dry, the whole thing, too dry for ink to be held again. So as far as Westminster is concerned, if you can repair it, fine. It's wonderful. But if not, then just leave it as is. Westminster, historian, Westminster Synagogue and the Trust. Westminster gets this load of over 1,200 Torah scrolls. And they come in and they built this room for them. They put them there, and then the rabbi said, we need a scribe. Where are we going to find a scribe who will be able to work on all of these? And this is the story. But that week, a gentleman knocked at the door of Westminster Synagogue and says, I'm a licensed scribe. Do you need any work on Torah tonight? Elijah. So, and Westminster says that he worked for 20 years, working as much as he could to try and fix the Torah scrolls. But by the time we got one, we were a little bit later in the game. It was clear that we were not going to get what they call a kosher scroll. So, that's it. Yes.
We have repaired our Holocaust Torah in Hollywood, Florida. And if anybody's interested, I have pictures of the Torah repair shop in my phone because we were just there when I go last spring. And we just had maybe one or two words that needed to be repaired again. And I thought the interesting thing was, the scribe lets you hold the quill as
So you write the Torah.
Yes,
You finish the Torah.
and I was allowed to write a shin, and we made the 3 lines like so, and then there's a line that comes like this, and he said we never repair that line because the original has to show through. But the Torah repair shop is just mine.
Okay. Other. Yes, Myra. Tell me.
This says,
Myra and her late husband Howard were the first BJBE family to go to Kolin. Just after we found out about Kolin as the origin and made our contacts with Rabbi Goldstein and Michael, they let us know there was going to be a commemoration in memory of the was it the 50th, 40th deportation from Kolin to Theresienstadt. And Howard and Michael, Myra and Howard, volunteered happily to go to Kolin and to bring to Prague and Kolin and to bring back word to the congregation. And they made a report when they came back. And one of the first eyewitness accounts that we had of where this Torah came from. Now, Myra.
Now, this has nothing and everything to do with today. I have a book here by a woman who wrote, her name is Gertrude Pollitt, who is a woman who has requested my presence to assist her in certain ways. I brought it today only to share with my friend Carol, who I'm meeting here today, for no other reason when I bring this in from my car, you see. Now, as I'm sitting here looking at this, Gertrude Pollitt, Gertrude Stein, like the famous Gertrude Stein, was born in Vienna. Her father came from Czechoslovakia. He was very proud of his Czech heritage. When he met her mother and married her mother in Vienna, he refused to give it up. So everyone else in his family was what they were born with, and he was still a Czech. You understand? Now, the Czech country was the only country who did not require you to put on your passport that you were a Jew. When Gertrude Pollitt, who is now 95 years old and lives in Highland Park, with a little girl, her father said, "You take this passport. Someday you might need it because it says you're a Czech." I just got chills. And she did. And because of that passport that said she was a Czech and not a Jew, is why she survived, became an analyst, a psychoanalyst, and now lives in Highland Park. And I bring the book in today. So go, isn't that a little bit of synchronicity? Huh?
Very
nice. All because of Carol.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you both.
Comments? Yeah, Arthur.
When we went to Kolin, didn't you say Barbara Streisand or somebody
Oh, yeah.
donated some money?
No.
I forgot what the story
Here's the
was.
story.
Yeah.
Did I lose it?
No, it was.
Here's the story. In the making of Yentl, the producers of Yentl were looking for a building, something that looked like a shtetl. And they came upon like a storehouse office gathering room, prayer room, which was part of the new Jewish cemetery in Kolin. And they filmed a few scenes of Yentl in this building, which had, I think, an ark in it, or could be an ark, and it could look like a shtetl synagogue. And they took all the furniture out, including a lot of the decorations around, and took it out to film some place with this furniture. Anyway, the bottom line is, she never gave it back. The producers, somebody never gave it back. And she was contacted, and yeah, this is not to knock Barbara Streisand, but this is the way the story goes, and I think it's true. She wasn't interested enough to use her influence to have the people who made the film get that furniture, the appurtenances, back to Kolin. That's the Barbara Streisand story. She ain't a hero in this story, or a heroine.
I knew there was something, but I didn't.
Well, that's the story, right? See, if there's a bad story about somebody who's basically okay, through the centuries she turns okay, or maybe she turns no good if she depends on the kind of stories. Yes, Carol.
She's actually the narrator of a film that is shown at the Holocaust Museum here. Yeah, so much for that.
Oh, what a busha, an embarrassment, is so busha. Okay, and now, what else did I want to tell you? Oh, well, now, Rabbi Feder was still alive when a number of these Torah scrolls were sent to around the world, talking now especially about American congregation. And he was contacted and told, I'm not sure of the date, this is a Czech rabbi's letter. He was contacted and told that Bowie, Maryland had a Kolin Torah, and they were having a dedication of the Torah with their new sanctuary. And might he send a letter of greeting from the rabbi of Kolin to the rabbi of Bowie and the congregation? And here is the letter that he sent. Do you see it, a Czech rabbi's letter? Now, I don't want to read the whole thing, but and I've read a little bit of it already. But here's right-hand column. The Nazis burned in our country more than 30 synagogues. Some of them were, after our return, demolished because they were in the way of city communication. Some of them were used as storehouses for various purposes. There's only one synagogue in Brno, 2 in Prague, 1 in Pilsen, and 1 in Decim. By the way, Feder left Kolin after a while, after he came back, because there was just no Jewish community there. He went back because that was his hometown, and he had a house there, and he and his sister kept house for him, but he couldn't hardly be a rabbi because there were no Jews, so he was asked to go to the town of Brno, which was a little bit larger, had a few more Jews, and he became the chief rabbi of Bohemia. Not covering a lot of people, but he at least was the whole rabbi of that section of Czechoslovakia. From the old synagogues, only the sacred Torahs remain. The State Jewish Museum sent them to London, and one of these is now among you. I can hear him talking to you and me. Same situation. One is now among you. Respect this Torah, and behold, that those people who used to listen to the reading from the Torah in temples were God-fearing Jews, honorable men and women, who longed to know the words of God and walk the path of the Lord prescribed in the Torah. We believe that we are Am Olam, an eternal people, which will never perish. When the cantor of Kolin took out the Torah from the Holy Ark, he cried at the pitch of his voice, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. These are the words which your Chazan will call. A confession of faith which will unite you with our forefathers and with all our brothers and sisters. May they live east or west, south or north. All are children of one God, and know that all Jews are brothers and sisters. You founded a new congregation on the American soil, and I wish you from the bottom of my heart that it should flourish, and it should be the bearer of the idea of brotherhood and peace for all peoples and nations. So nice that we have these things. But we have some other letters of his too. We have other kinds of documents, but I think that's enough for today. Before we get to the Torah itself, I want to see if there's anything I missed that I wanted to tell. You can go to London and make contact with Westminster and see everything. See the Torahs that are left and talk to them about the stories. Anna, anything you would add that we didn't say?
Well, I don't know what, I came late, so I don't know what you said.
No.
No.
Anybody else who's been there want to say, well, we do, when you listen to the Kaddish list of the congregation and mixed among the Greenbergs and the Rosenblatts and the Shapiros and all the rest of the normal names, listen for the Bohemian.
We went.
What are they? Robichev, Korichev, Abramova, Ova, and the end is the feminine. Yeah.
When my husband and I went, when Bob and I went, my husband's family names are not only Steiner but Robichek. His grandmother was a Robichek. And before we went, we contacted somebody who knew a great aunt of his that's still alive there. And we visited her after the group left. We stayed on and we visited her. And she only spoke German, but she had a granddaughter that knew a little English. And between a little English and a little bit of Yiddish that I might figure out, we communicated. We brought pictures and she had pictures and we had some of the same photographs. And she told me the story through her granddaughter of my husband's family. His grandfather, great-grandmother, his grandmother, was one of three. She, during the 40s, you had a choice. You either left, you were killed, or you converted. She's the one of the three that left. Her brother remained a Jew and was murdered. The sister married out and converted, still lives. And she talked about one of her, she was in Teresa, but she survived. And her child died there of starvation when she was there. But it was very interesting. And when we went to the cemetery and we saw all the Steiner graves and Robichek graves, it was amazing. That's the story. If you were a Jew then, you had three choices. And here was a family that each one of them, the siblings, made a different choice. The one that left survived.
Let's examine and read the Kolin Torah. When you get close, I mean, this is obviously the distress marks are unintentional. It should be, it always has. But it's
You know, in a regular Torah, how do you prevent the evil from right now? You said the evil was.
There's pirates and
It's a special kind of thing. Animals.
Is the ink better now than they used to use? Is there a special kind of wood they use?
We're going to read from it, and you're going to be able to read from it. I promise you, you're going to be able to read from it. Come at least to be able to put your eyes on it. Put your eyes on it. Your right hand here, and I have to remember to do it. We'll do the Torah. Baruch Hu Adonai Baruch Baruch Adonai Baruch Elam Bayet Baruch Atah Adonai Elohim Melech Haolam Asher Bachartanu Mikol Ha'amim V'na'atan decided that his kids are saying this, and you were going to sing it, also in your synagogue. Here we go. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Ve'ahavta Adonai Elohecha, B'chol levacha u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol me'odecha, ve'hayu ha'varim ha'eleh, asher anochi mitzavacha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinata levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha b'beitecha, u'lecha b'derech, u'shavtecha u'lumecha, u'sharta Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam v'tayim tofeinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. You can see how excited we were to open this the first time and realize that it was an mystic Torah. It wasn't just a scrap.
Rabbi, can you get to Deuteronomy 29, verse 9 to 14? That was my Torah portion.
Well, you'd have to go,
You stand his phone.
Here's the last question. The last question is, what's the origin of this Torah? And everybody would say, Kolin. Not sure. And I'll tell you they're not sure. They found in this, in the cellar in these suburban synagogues outside of Prague, each one of the Torahs had a tag on it that said where it was from. What synagogue, what town it was from. Said 25 of the Torah scrolls in the basement there were tagged Kolin. The ark in Kolin, which you can see back in there, is quite a large ark, but there's no way you can get 25 Torahs. What's the answer to this conundrum? Here's the answer that Michael Hefner has, and it makes sense to me. What the Nazis did was to take Torahs from the hinterland, from small places, and heap them up in one place for storage before they were sent on to Prague. And there was sort of what do they call it when you ship, a drop station. Kolin seems to have been a drop station for tourists from little towns around. Bring them there, and then we'll take a whole bunch to Prague. And that's how they could have been 25. So the truth is, we like to talk about this as Rabbi Feder's Torah and Kolin. And maybe, but also maybe not. Maybe from Kotnara, maybe from Brno, or something.
But it dropped off.
It certainly was dropped off.
It was there and left.
And you know what?
There's no for me.
Good enough for me. It doesn't make any difference. Okay, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.